Hello, everybody. My name is Emily Garcia, and I'm one of the academic success coaches this semester. Today, we are doing the workshop, Grow What You Know. So let me go ahead and share the PowerPoint so we can go ahead and get started. Okay, so grow what you know. So I wanted to create this workshop so that we could enhance any study habits, that you already have, and kind of so you know how to tackle them better, so you can, essentially optimize stuff that you already know. So you're not having to take the time to relearn anything. It's already hard enough when maybe your grades aren't as high as you want, or you're just struggling to understand things, and then you have to learn a whole new study habit. Like, that's sometimes a little bit unattainable. So I'm hoping that this workshop can help you see that you have all the tools that you need already, and that sometimes it just takes a moment to really reflect and see what it is that you do that works the most, and learn how to optimize that thing instead of, learning something else. So the way I thought we'd go about this is kind of first understanding the learning styles. So there is a lot of learning styles. There's, more than just these four, but these four are basically the most well-known, most talked about, and you can usually fall within these things. There's some that are like subcategories of these, and some that are a little bit more rare to find, but usually you can find at least some sort of connection with one of these. So we have visual learning, which is obviously, being able to see it, and, being able to see it and maybe watch it or something like that helps you, have the information sink in, essentially. And then there's auditory learning, which is what I am, which is, listening to things, having it to where your ears are kind of like your main mode of letting everything sink in. Reading and writing learning is obviously reading the information and having it sink in the better or the best that way. And then kinesthetic learning is sometimes called tactile learning. It's essentially using movement or using practical situations that maybe involve you going through some sort of process, or, even just imagining a process that helps things sink in more. So first, we're going to go through visual learning. One great thing that I always tell people that actually this works for visual and auditory is using Khan Academy. So Khan Academy is essentially like a gold mine for reviewing a lot of pretty basic concepts, especially if you're going into something like the MCAT. I think they have stuff for DAT and the OATs. Basically what they do is, pretend that this is a blackboard. And so you see the blackboard on the screen, and they're writing, the information that you need. And as they're writing it, maybe as they're writing, an equation for maybe calculus, they're telling you why they're writing the certain things. They're essentially talking you through the processes while you're able to see it. And a lot of times they'll give you tips and tricks and things to really remember, that maybe your professors also told you, but maybe you forgot, or maybe they didn't think to tell you. I know I use them a lot. I ended up having to take the entrance exams to get into nursing school, and I use them a lot to go over a lot of the anatomical type things, and they'd have a lot of great stuff on that, especially actually also with visual learning, especially if you're going to the healthcare field. There is a program, I forgot what it is called, but I'm sure there's a lot of different options for it, where they will essentially have on your computer, a diagram or a visual of a human body, and you can modify it in certain ways to where maybe it only shows the blood systems, or maybe it only shows the organs, or only shows the bones, or shows all of it, or shows the muscle, whatever it may be. And they, if you click on, let's say, the liver, it'll have a lot of information on it, and it helps you visualize it a lot more. It helps kind of like take what you're reading specifically in maybe your lectures or in your textbooks, and then it helps you see it in more of a real life type situation. I think we all know that, in the classroom, even though it's stuff that you need to know, sometimes it starts to feel a little arbitrary because it's hard to connect it, to real life stuff. Sometimes you start saying like, why am I going to need to know this? And arguably there are things that I'm sure you're not going to run into in the future, but most of the stuff I would say, especially when you're, getting later into your undergrad career, the stuff that you're learning is very pertinent to things that you'll have in your career. So it's important to be able to think about them on a practical basis versus just in the textbook. Sometimes the textbook is more like only concentrating on one molecule in the liver, but if you don't know how that molecule works with the spleen or with the heart, you might have a harder time understanding the actual process. So basically what I'm saying is utilize these things like Khan Academy, things like, anatomical type programs or whatever it may be for your certain, area of expertise or area of study to, allow you to see things kind of zoomed out a little bit more, whereas maybe in your textbooks, you're zoomed in. So going on with the visual learning, flashcards or something that definitely fall into this category, mostly because, maybe not the writing portion of that, maybe that would fit more into the reading, writing, learning, but it's more of the fact that you have it and you can see the name or you can see the definition and it's, registering that way. And then you have to remember the next word. And sometimes if you notice when you're doing it over and over and over again, you kind of picture the word. And that shows you that you're having an easier time learning visually. The next thing that is also helpful is using diagrams, kind of like what I was saying before with those programs, but maybe on a different level, is being able to break up that information. You see with this graphic that I put, they probably could have explained that in a paragraph in a textbook, but instead they, broke it up into sections and made it a lot more easily comprehensible. So doing that helps you see things maybe in a more concise way that helps sink in more. So sitting near the front of class, I know this is something that you're probably thinking like, unless you're like me and already like to sit in the front, you're probably thinking like, no, I do not want to sit in the front. But it does help if you're a visual learner. You're able to see things a lot better. You're able to concentrate a lot more visually. I think we all know that when you're sitting towards the front, you might be a little less likely to look at your phone or a little less likely to get sidetracked. But if you're in the front, you're really engaged, you're going to be able to get those benefits of being a visual learner a lot easier. So making outlines and concept maps. And I didn't know what a concept map was before this, so I have an example on the next slide. But this is another thing that just taking the time to break that stuff down so that you can see it in an easier, more digestible way is important, and it'll help you, essentially optimize. You might do just fine reading it. You might be able to picture it, but it might not work for all your classes. I have a lot of students that come in that they're like, this method worked freshman year and sophomore year, but now it's not working for junior year. And that's normal. And that happens because obviously maybe the professors expect more, or maybe the classes are a little bit harder. So maybe when you didn't have to make outlines for one class, you now have to make outlines for another. So just make sure you're paying attention to that process and don't get stuck, in your old ways. And color coding, again, is also something that it helps lead your eye to that, important information that, all the other information is important, but those are the key things you need to see, especially when it's before a test, and it helps you visualize what's the most key concepts. I think basically this graphic tells mostly what I'm talking about. So the characteristics, are sees to learn, lacks images, take notes, looks around a lot, and struggles with, having an easy time remembering things, when they're just spoken to you. So learning tips is, to watch, because you will take in spoken information better if it is accompanied with visual aids. So video is a great tool for you. Visualize things like I was saying when you're learning them, try to visualize really how they work. Write things down, draw, which is very helpful. Also goes into that kinesthetic learning. and bring color, that color coding type thing into your study habits. So this is an example of a concept map. This really breaks down kind of exactly what you would put. So maybe in the main idea, you would put, I don't know, maybe the organ system, and then you would put multiple types of organs, and then maybe have, a small detail about those organs in the farther out portions of the concept map. And that just helps break things down, really shows the hierarchy of things, and especially when it comes to healthcare type things. I do apologize. I did a lot of work in the healthcare system, so it's easy for me to link it to that, but it is very helpful for every type of academic or career-based type situation. So auditory learning, obviously this is learning best through listening. This is how I learn best. Auditory learners, I think, have an easier time when they go into a class that's very lecture heavy, because basically the entire class you're going to be listening. You maybe don't even have to take notes if you're a certain type of auditory learner. Obviously I say just do it, just be careful. But especially actually during this time with coronavirus, is auditory learners kind of have that extra thing, because a lot of your classes are probably recorded. You could listen back to your class times and have that really easy time to really take advantage of that auditory learning. So some of the tips that I got and things to consider are reading notes and chapters out loud. I don't know about you guys, but when I read things, I will rush through it. If I'm not reading it out loud, it'll just go in one ear and out the other if I'm not paying attention. But if I'm having to really articulate them and say them out loud, I just have an easier time remembering, because I think it's a lot more intentional. So record yourself reading notes and listening to them later. This is something that I recommend to a lot of people. Of course, it sometimes is like a little odd to think of, but especially, I've had students come in that are like, I have no free time, to get outside, because obviously getting outside right now is a very important thing, to get that fresh air, especially if you're inside most of the time. They complain about not having time to do that and how that's taking a toll. So I say, okay, if you're having a hard time kind of breaking that up and being able to study and also get that time, why don't you record yourself reading your notes? Then when you take a walk, put your AirPods in, or your just earbuds like I have, just the regular old-fashioned ones, and listen to yourself reading the notes aloud. It's the same type of thing, and it makes it to where you don't have to feel like you're wasting time, or that you're not, doing something to, work towards your academic success. But it's also prioritizing your self-care. And it's fun. It's a whole different way to do it too. So listen to lectures closely, and I didn't write it, but listen to it again. And then also seeing a professor merely just to have them explain something again. I have done this before, and it is very helpful. Our professors at our school are fantastic, especially the ones in my program. But they're human, and so they, I think, sometimes maybe get to thinking that because they know something really well, maybe you'll know it, and maybe sometimes it'll cause them to go fast over something or skip over something, and they don't even realize it. They have all the intention to teach you everything, they just maybe didn't think about it. But if you go into their office hours and you're like, hey, we were talking about this equation in our class, but I'm not really understanding it, can you go over it again with me? And they have absolutely no problem doing that. They have those office hours for a reason, and most of the time they are very much not used. And it's a great time to not only get that explanation again so that you have it clearly, but you also are making much closer relationships with your professors that will make just your academic life so much richer and will help you in the long run, because those are people that can help you get scholarships, help you get jobs, whatever it may be, even recommendation letters. Having that strong relationship is very useful for many, many different reasons. So our little graphic again, kind of, explains what we were already talking about. So auditory learners are people that just, gravitate towards that auditory type thing, are, the type that hears to learn, enjoys listening. They're good at talking and probably talking slowly and good at presenting a lot of the time. It says that they're a chatterbox, which I think is funny. And sometimes they get, distracted by noise. And sometimes it says struggles with, I don't really agree that it struggles with, but they tend to read slowly. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think I know I read very slowly. I think it's something you just have to acknowledge and know that maybe you'll need a little bit of extra time to read your chapter or read an outline. As long as you know what's going on, then you'll do just fine in terms of accommodating those types of things. So some tips is to, watch videos so that you can hear people, especially like I said with Khan Academy, it helps a lot. Read things aloud, like I said, repeat things, discuss things with maybe family or friends or other colleagues so that you really get that back and forth. That will help you. And avoid noise, because obviously if you're an auditory learner, you're probably pretty sensitive in terms of what you hear, and maybe you're doing great and your momentum is great for studying, but then maybe you hear, I know I'm hearing a bunch of birds outside. And maybe if I put my headphones in, I wouldn't hear them. So just making those accommodations could help a lot. So this next one, the reading writing learner. I am definitely not this kind of learner, but I know many of my friends that are, and when they've really noticed what kind of learner they are, they have a much easier time. So something good to do is to take detailed notes. It's obviously something that's good for everybody, but especially if you know that writing it out and reading it later is going to be something that will help you do, whether it be better on the test or just have the stuff sink in better. It's important to remember to do that. Don't just take vague notes. Don't assume that you'll understand it in 3 weeks when there's the exam. Take those detailed notes, take the time to do it. So especially if you are this type of learner, it also goes towards your overall studying. Rewrite and reread notes. This was something I did a lot in college. Unfortunately, I am not a reading writing learner, so it didn't help me very much. But if you are, things like what I used to do is, let's say you're looking at this PowerPoint slide that I'm showing right now. Maybe you'd read it and then you look away and you think about it for a second, and you wouldn't look back at the slide, but you would write down everything you remember in your own words. And then maybe you could look back at the slider and make sure you didn't miss anything. But that helps it kind of sink in so that you're not just copying everything down, but you are rewriting it. Translate charts and diagrams into words, and write a practical story using academic content. So it's just another thing of linking it to more practical type things so that it makes more sense in kind of real life outside of academic life. So some of the characteristics are studies to learn. Obviously, everybody studies no matter what kind of learner you are, but studies in maybe more the traditional sense of reading the textbook, reading the notes, something like that. Likes to read, is big on notes. Perfect student, question mark. Again, and it says right there, they're usually more interested in the traditional style. Does that mean they are the perfect student? No. Does it mean that any of the other types of learners are not great students or perfect students? No, that does not mean that. Does it mean that maybe they can not even conform, but are more interested in maybe what's considered more traditional ways of learning? Yeah, absolutely. That doesn't mean that they're any better or worse of a student than anybody else. It says, again, I don't really love the struggling part, but it says diagrams maybe aren't something that they have the easiest time learning from. They probably like more of a detailed outlook and less of the kind of concise type thing. So tips is to continue reading, continue taking notes, rewriting, using your own words, and translating your diagrams to notes, because you can't really learn very well from those diagrams. So the next kind is kinesthetic/tactile. So these types of people like to create and build models. This doesn't have to just be like what I assume. I mean, I know I'm thinking of, I don't know if anybody else is, when you think of when you're trying to learn about molecules, you use those styrofoam balls and you make it into, a model of the molecule. It doesn't have to be just that. It can just even be the sense that they think about how something would come together, or how a certain system would, work all in unison. They move around while studying. This is something that also goes with what I was talking about of walking while studying. Make sure you're obviously keeping your eyes, aware of your surroundings, but maybe listening to, maybe a podcast on what you're learning, or a lecture of what you're learning. Memorize words and definitions, and then you close your eyes and trace them with your finger. This was something I found very, very interesting, and I really did think about it, and I thought about who does this, or where you see it a lot, and you see it a lot when you watch like spelling bees. You'll see them, maybe it's not like up like this, but you'll see them do it on their hand, and it's because it's a very easy way to learn how to spell things, and you picture in your head, but you spell it out on your hand just to make sure you're doing it right. So that's a good thing to do. I mentioned the Pomodoro method for these types of learners to keep focused. This method can work for everybody, but especially for kinesthetic learners, it seems like they're a lot more wanting to be active, which means they do have a much higher chance of maybe losing focus. So I did do a video on Pomodoro method, and I have mentioned it basically to every student I've seen, and probably in another workshop, but a brief example of it is, if I'm sitting here, maybe when I was making the presentation, we'll use that as an example. I would put, a timer on my phone for 25 minutes, and I would work for those 25 minutes and not get distracted. And then once the timer would go off, I would give myself 5 minutes of doing whatever I want, as long as it's not the presentation. And then after those 5 minutes are over, I'd go back doing 25 minutes of the presentation, and then have a 5-minute break, and so on and so forth until I finish it, or finish whatever I was going to that day. So that might help you kind of get your stuff done while also understanding that you might need those breaks. The last thing is to use practical examples. This, like I've said, works for everybody, but especially works for this type of learner because they seem to learn on more of a practical type idea. You obviously can't really move around and use that maybe to learn more philosophical ideas, but maybe if you think about them in more of an everyday type scenario and how it would work, it would make more sense. So some of the characteristics are moves to learn, likes hands-on type things. So maybe like dissecting something, or learning maybe an engineering type thing while watching it, watching somebody actually do it. So one of the things that they do to remember is, you remember things best when you have done them yourself, which is not always attainable, especially during COVID. But, sometimes you can find creative ways to do things. They do tend to get fidgety at times, which is why I mentioned the Pomodoro method. And I don't know if you across the board suffer from, a short attention span. I think that's kind of going to the extreme or assuming of the student, but I think it's good to remember that every student gets sidetracked, every student gets distracted, no matter how long you've been in school, no matter how focused you are. There's always going to be something, even if it's not your phone, even if it's just a thought in your head, there's always going to be something that can distract you. So using things like the Pomodoro method or any other method that helps you, is good. And it's responsible to think about it that way instead of trying to just eradicate whatever's going to distract you. Because I promise, something else will take its place. There's never not going to be a distraction. And that's normal because you're living a normal life. There's always going to be distractions no matter what, so don't beat yourself too much. Don't beat yourself up too much about it. So learning tips. Use examples, like I said, while learning. So let's say I'm explaining, I don't know, maybe I'm trying to learning how to understand operant conditioning. So if you don't know, operant conditioning is essentially using reinforcements or punishments to kind of manipulate the mind, whether it's animal minds, human minds. And it kind of goes along the lines of if you give something a treat or some sort of reward for doing something right, and you consistently do that, they're more likely to do that thing. Whereas if you take something away or maybe give them some sort of punishment consistently, they're less likely to do that thing. So maybe I'm reading that in the book and I'm having a hard time remembering it, but then I remember, maybe how I act with my dog, and I think about how, maybe when they go pee in the house, I, maybe scold them and say, you have to sit on the porch now for 10 minutes, or you don't get a treat later, or you this or that, or maybe you go into a crate or something for 10 minutes. And if they, let's say, sit on command, or do anything on command, maybe then you'll give them a treat. Then if you think about it in more of an everyday personal, in your everyday life type example, might make a lot more sense. Discuss things with people, it's pretty across the board type thing. Get active, with role playing and active problem solving. Move around and take breaks. So we're almost done. But outside of those learning styles is the environment that you set. So I included this environment to the left on the screen because that environment just looks like, at least for me, the most serene, studying environment ever. It's so organized. It has a huge desk and it's all those plants. The cushion looks very soft. I have books right there that maybe are the books that I'll need for class. I have pencils, there's a light, there's a bunch of stuff. But it also is very organized. So it's important to find a good study spot, and we might not always be lucky. I know I don't have the availability for that type of study spot. Actually, most of the time when I study is right where you're seeing me right now, in this chair that's not the most comfortable chair ever, and a TV tray that is not very big. So sometimes you have to improvise, but I do have a plant and a window right next to me, which makes it a lot better. So I have natural lighting, like it's saying, lighting is very important. Some people like fluorescent lighting. Try not to do it though, because it does strain your eyes. And try to get blue light glasses if you can. You can get them very cheap at Walgreens or Amazon. They have a lot of cheap ones too. So lighting is very important just to kind of set the mood. At least for me, I like to feel relaxed when I'm studying. So sometimes I'll just put on one light that is light enough so I can read, but not enough for me to feel like bombarded with light. Sometimes you can do outside and sometimes it's better to do inside. I know right now it's a little bit harder because some of us are living in an apartment with other people or at our homes with our families, or maybe we don't have an outside area accessible. So outside doesn't always have to be something, but outside can even include you sitting at your desk and opening a window. That changes the entire environment versus keeping it closed. But just trying to find somewhere that is yours. Like I'm saying, dedicate a delegated study zone in your home that is yours. Maybe you share it with somebody else too, but when you're studying, you're the only person there. This is just so important because it's going to keep you a lot more focused, keep you a lot more motivated. And I do always say it's best to not study in your bed, mostly because your bed should be somewhere that you are comfortable, you're only sleeping or relaxing in. If you're studying in your bed, you might start to get stressed in your bed. You want to keep that boundary. So maybe whether it's a kitchen table or a desk or a TV tray that was probably $5, whatever it may be, try to find a dedicated area and establish rules for others. I know I had a student that came in that does live at her parents' house right now, and I believe she said she had a sibling or two also in the home. So it was hard for her to have a quiet area, even if it was just in her bedroom. And she really wanted to be able to study outside of her bedroom too. So she gave her, her family a very detailed schedule showing when she's going to be studying certain things. And she figured out, some sort of agreement between her and her parents that they'll be quiet and they'll also keep her accountable if she's studying outside her room, because they'll be able to see her and they'll be able to say, why are you on your phone? What are you doing? Why don't you keep studying? But establishing those rules and saying, hey, whoever it may be, I'm going to be studying in my room right now. Please don't come in unless you really need to. And that's very easy, very friendly, gentle boundary to set. Distractions. So you all have them. Like I said, no shame. I have so many distractions. I'm looking at my phone as we speak. It's like a distraction all the time. So when you're studying, trying to avoid social media. I think that's a given. I think we all know this. But we don't all know that there are actually apps that will restrict your usage. So I'm not sure exactly what they're called. I used to know, but there's a lot of them for all different types of phones that you go on and you'll say, oh, I want to only go on Instagram for 45 minutes a day, or I don't want to go on Instagram for this time of the day. And it will close the app if you go into it. And it helps because it's, of course you could delete the app if you wanted to, if you really wanted to go that far, but it helps you have that restriction that's so easy to make and that really reminds you like, oh, I forgot I was going to do this. I need to continue. Have a friend play phone security. I used to have to do this. Not that they take your phone, because I would never say that. People might need to reach you. If there's an emergency situation and you need to have your phone, I always say keep it near you. I never say put your phone in another room or, lock it in something. You should always have your phone with you, especially if you're in a public place. But having another friend with you that knows you're not supposed to touch your phone unless it's an emergency can play that security, can, whether it be swat your hand or be like, are you kidding? Like, don't use your phone. They can kind of help play that security role and create positive reinforcement for staying off your phone. So this is something that I kind of modified from something I used to do. Something I used to do when I hated reading. I just hate it so much when it's academic. What I used to do is something that I saw, I think, in a magazine, where like every page you have like one Skittle. Like you get a bag of Skittles and every page you get to have one. Or every page you get to have a sip of whatever really good drink, or a bite of your dinner. That helps you keep going, keep that momentum, and you can do that for not going on your phone. You give yourself an incentive for not. So it's the same type of situation. So notes and reviewing, use memory games for last minute reviews. That's always very good. You can use that just with flashcards or Quizlet. Very easy things. Try not to, read all of your notes an hour before. That's just going to overwhelm you, and you need to stay as relaxed and as stress-free as you can before it, for actually a multitude of reasons. Because I know if I get way too overwhelmed before an exam, I'll get like a stomach ache or a headache that just makes everything so much worse. And I noticed if I was relaxed and I was calm, those wouldn't happen. Reflect on study habits and results for reorganization. This kind of goes in the sense that you should never stop evaluating how things are going. Just because maybe you watch this and you're like, okay, I'm going to do this and this and this from now on. Let's say you take an exam and you don't do as well as you thought, or you're feeling like it's not really working that well. You don't have to stick to the techniques or the habits that you're doing. You're not married to them. You're not, signed to a contract to studying a certain way. Keep trying new things, keep figuring out what works for you. And that might continue until you're done with school, but you just have to keep trying and keep reevaluating, and maybe right away you'll find something great, and then a year later you'll realize it doesn't work anymore. You just have to be flexible. So rewrite an outline. That basically goes into the idea that you can memorize it, but also comprehend it. So memorizing something does not mean that you know it. It means that you can recall it. That does not mean that you comprehend it. So you might be able to recall it for a multiple choice question, but you probably wouldn't be able to recall it for a short answer. You wouldn't be able to explain it to somebody. So when you're rewriting things, make sure that you can outline it without looking at the original source. Go over and repeat notes after class. This is just a great thing to do to help it sink in. You know, spend 15 minutes every night or every night that you have class to just read over your notes. You don't have to test yourself. You don't have to be like, oh, I really don't understand that. Let me research it. Just read through them and just let it sink in. Studies have shown actually that doing something like that right before bed and right when you wake up really helps it sink in. I believe this is the last one, but setting up for success can also be pretty. It can also be serene and fun. This is also another place that I'm like, wow, that looks like a beautiful place to study. I might get distracted by those flowers and I'm not really sure what they're doing on the computer, but nevertheless, it shows that you can set up a really, really great, really zen, situation for yourself. And you can use things like aromatherapy. We all know that lavender helps you relax if you want to do something like that. I believe it's like citrus things that help you stay focused. Do something like that. And studying doesn't have to be so black and white of, okay, now I'm going to sit down and do this and it's going to be awful. You can really make it as good as possible by setting up these types of things. And having plants is always helpful. It does help the oxygen levels in your room. Having music, I know I have one song that's an instrumental that I can play if I'm doing something pretty easy, and it keeps me locked on that screen. For some reason, it keeps me so focused. So try to find, your song and get a study group or partner. This does not work for everybody. This actually doesn't work for me very well. But I know that it helps people, and it even helps people just on a supplementary level. You don't have to have a study partner for every class just because it works in one. If it works for your sociology class, but not your calculus class, just do it for the sociology one. It does not have to be simultaneous throughout all of your classes. Just do what works for you for each individual thing. And that is it. So I hope that if you're watching this, you found this helpful. It's really just all about doing your best to set up, a great opportunity for you to do well. And that, like I said, is changing every day, every moment. So just keep checking in with yourself on that. And I hope to see you guys soon. Bye.